Have you ever stopped to wonder where you came from? Not just your hometown or where you were born, but your real roots. You may have even wondered if you were descended from Vikings.
Traveling to research the lives or the places where your ancestors lived is surging in popularity. This is no surprise, considering the popularity of TV shows such as Finding Your Roots and Who Do You Think You Are, and the easily accessible DNA kits now to find out your DNA heritage. More and more people are delving into their roots and packing their bags to explore their ancestry.
We have done several trips that involved ancestry research and seeing where our ancestors live. Today we're going to tell you about one very special trip we made through time and place to see where my Danish ancestors lived and worked. In the end, we discovered where their farms were, and we're going to take you on that journey of how we discovered those farms and traveling to see those places. And we're going to tell you how we did it.
We are Next Act Retirement and Travel, where we focus on retirement-related travel. I'm Bob.
And I'm Sarah.
And Sarah has a hobby that she loves to do, which is researching our family ancestries.
That's right. I can share how this research worked for me in this instance and how I was able to uncover information that was previously completely unknown to my family. And that is the really astounding part of doing this kind of research, is finding out something you never thought you'd be able to find out.
Now we'll start telling you about how you can do this for yourself. But let's get into this astounding story. Sarah, did you know anything about your Danish ancestry?
I knew I had Danish heritage, but the details were a little vague. The Danish heritage comes through my maternal grandmother. Actually, we lived next door to my grandparents on our family farm, so we spent a lot of time with them. Sometimes when we were at their house, my grandma would be going through her family history materials. Now, this is way before computers or the internet, so it involves things like newspaper clippings, even family trees that she had meticulously typed out on a manual typewriter. There were obituaries, there were just photographs, all kinds of bits of information. I think my grandmother, if she were still alive and finding out about this research available on the internet, would just be flabbergasted about the amount of information available and what we found out.
And she would really love it too, Sarah.
She would have.
It really is amazing how much research is available online. So, Sarah, how did you get started with all this?
Step one is looking at what you have and asking questions of family members who might have some more information. After my grandma passed away, I took to looking through her bits and pieces and seeing what there was. I thought it would be really interesting to dig deeper and find out more about my Danish ancestors.
Sarah, did you have anything in particular that you were trying to find?
For me, I really wanted to be able to find the town that the family came from. So another important step when you start on this type of journey is setting up a goal or an objective of what you're looking for. Instead of being overwhelmed by all the trees in the forest, you can focus on just information that you want to find out. And I don't want to take you completely down the rabbit hole of genealogy research, but I do want to show you a few examples of what I found along the way and how I found those things. So if you want to do this journey, you can have a little bit of a leg up.
Did you have any idea where your ancestors came from or where they were born in Denmark?
Not really, but as we get started here, let me just put a little context on this family. Here's my grandmother. She was born in the United States. But here we have my grandmother's parents, who are all born in Denmark, but came to the United States as children. Then we'll add my great-great-grandparents, who were also born in Denmark, but came to the United States as adults with these families of children. As you can see, I only had to go back just another generation or two to find ancestors who actually came from Denmark. This was really helpful in tracing my origins. I was confident they were from Denmark. We just didn't have any idea of where to look in Denmark. I started by looking at my grandmother's paternal side of the family. According to her notes, all of my great-great-grandfather's siblings and their families came to the United States, so I would have a lot of collateral relatives to cross-reference some information.
I'm sure everyone has heard of Ancestry.com, probably from the TV commercials. Did you use Ancestry.com for the search?
Well, I did start with Ancestry, but I quickly ran into a problem. At least at that time, there were a limited amount of Danish records on Ancestry. I'm sure it's improved greatly in the years since. But also, I was looking for the family name Hansen. Do you have any idea how many Hansens are in Denmark now and before? I mean, it really was a needle in a haystack.
So, Sarah, how did you get past the sticking point?
That's a good question and a good story. I turned to finding initially as many obituaries as I could for my closer ancestors, and I ended up finding nothing. It said like they were born in Denmark or born in a city in Denmark that maybe didn't seem to make any sense.
It's just like saying they were born in New York City in the United States.
That's right. It's just a little bit too broad. And then I turned to those collateral relatives. And I happened to find 2 obituaries or newspaper articles from those collateral relatives that mentioned a place in Denmark. That was Vejle, Denmark.
So, Sarah, where is Vejle, Denmark?
That's good. Let's put up a map.
You love those maps, don't you?
I do. Vejle is a city and also a county in Denmark. Now I could narrow down my search parameters. I still had the needle in the haystack, but the haystack was not all of Denmark. It was this county of Vejle, Denmark. In doing this, I'll give you another hint. Another hint is to try to find some sort of map online of the political subdivisions of an area. So like this, I got a map or found a map of the political subdivisions of the county of Vejle. I think in English they might call them parishes, and we'll call them parishes. And that was helpful when I started to get a little bit closer to what we were looking for.
Were you able to find out anything about your ancestors coming to America?
Everybody wants to know that, right?
Right.
How they came there, when they came to America. And the short answer is yes. After I looked on Ancestry and couldn't find a lot of specific information, I started to look for some other sources of where I could find information, and I found the Danish archives online. So one hint here is that don't restrict yourself to some sort of paid resource, which they are good because they have very good search engines, but also look beyond that to maybe some free resources that are available online. And this Danish archive was fully accessible online and at no charge or no registration even. So one of the first things I looked for was a certain database called the Danish Immigrant Database. Apparently during a certain period of time, if you were a Dane and emigrating to another country, you had to register with the government. So that's kind of a really helpful thing. And how they had it organized on the archive system was that this information was indexed and therefore searchable by name and other parameters. And I have to tell you, I had to put in a lot of different variables and parameters, but like magic, I found the record that I wanted. I'm going to put that up here as an example of what I found in the Danish Immigrant Database. This is the family. This is my great-grandfather, Hans Marius Hansen, who's here in this group with his parents and his siblings who all came over to America in 1882. This record is interesting because it tells you the ship that they came on and also where they were living before they headed out to America.
So it was a treasure trove of information. That is really cool.
It is cool.
Yeah.
You feel like you are gaining some headway on this project. And what was also useful in this record is I found out my great-great-grandparents' Danish first names. For example, my great-great-grandfather always went to the United States, and all the U.S. Census records showed Andrew Hansen. Now you see him in this record as Anders Hansen. I could have searched for years in Denmark for an Andrew Hansen and never would have found the right Andrew Hansen. What I needed to search for was Anders Hansen.
We have census records here in the U.S., Sarah. Was there something like that available in Denmark?
Yes, there sure was. That was amazing. On the same archive, they had census records there, and they were also indexed, so they were searchable by parameters. So I started to look for, my goal was to find Anders Hansen with his parents and siblings. So I had to choose a census year, looking at the age of the people, a census year that would have the parents and a lot of the children at home at the same time. And another hint here is if you have a group of family members you're searching for in one record, search on the most unusual name. I doubt I searched on Anders Hansen because that is super, super common. I probably chose his mother, whose first name was Bertha, or one of the siblings with maybe a name that was not quite as common. And I'll tell you at first, when looking at these Danish records that are often in Danish, that's really intimidating. But stick with it, folks. Whatever language you're looking at, stick with it, and you will catch on eventually.
Okay, Sarah, don't keep us in suspense. What did you find?
Yes, I did find something, and I'm going to put it up here, this 1845 census. You see the parents Bertha and Hans Andersen, and then their group of children that includes Anders Hansen and all the siblings, and those all matched up with the age information that I had from my grandmother's notes. So, I'm making headway on this.
It's getting exciting.
It's getting exciting. You can see that they are in the county of Vejle, but also you have some really important additional information that they're in the parish of Vejle. And that's going to become critical for the next step.
Okay, Sarah, I'm confused. Why are the children's last names different from their parents' last names?
That's a really good question, Bob. And I can tell you the answer. In Denmark, at least at that time, they had a patronymic naming system. So here, where the father's first name was Hans, and then his son's name, my great-grandfather Anders Hansen, become Anders Hansen or Anders Hans son. So that's how they did it. And you did have to get used to that going through the records, that there was going to be this name flip all of the time.
What about birth or death records? Did you find any of those?
Yes, that's where I dug into next. On that Danish Archives Online, I noticed parish books. I'm thinking, what's going to be in this parish book? So I tried them out, and I found out they included the birth, confirmation, marriage, and death records for a parish. So you can see how critical it was to know the parish where the family was from. They were not indexed, however. You just had to look at the original records electronically. So you would pull up a book for a span of years and you would have to electronically page through it. However, they did have a certain organization to them. So once you figured that out, you could kind of skip ahead and back electronically to hone in on a certain year and type of records you were looking for. And so I'll show you one example of these parish records. This is the record for the birth of my great-grandfather Hans Marius Hansen. And one thing you can see that they're organized in a form. So you have the birth date, the name, the baptism, and the parents' names. The handwriting on this record is probably not that great, but average for what I experienced. I found some very beautiful handwriting and some that were a lot worse than this. What is really useful about most all of these parish book records is they almost always included the parents of the person that the record was made for. So that really takes you each level. You can go back to the next generation and keep rolling back. And that is how I got back to about the 5th great grandparents in this family tree situation.
That is truly amazing, Sarah.
It really is. It just blows you away. Once I figured out how to use the census records and the parish books, that is when the real magic started to happen, and I could just keep building out that family tree. I probably added 500 or 1,000 people to the family tree by just following those trails of family members.
Now, on the 2 shows that we have loved watching, Finding Your Roots and Who Do You Think You Are, when people are given the information about their ancestors that they didn't know, they can be very emotional, they can be very excited. How did this make you feel, finding out this information about your ancestors?
Well, I think I felt the same way. You kind of sit back and you're just in awe and amazement that there is a record there and it tells you this information about your family. It's incredible. And you kind of get over this thing that your immigrant ancestor was some sort of lone wolf who came alone, had no family members whatsoever, and struck out alone for the United States. And I think in most cases, I find that is not the case. There's family members all over the place in the country that they left and in the country that they're coming to. And it's just like a ant trail of movement.
Yes, they have to have some sort of a support system to be able to come from that country to this country.
I think many did.
Yes. So, Sarah, did you reach your goal of finding where your family came from?
Yes, I did. Those census records and those parish records honed me into a parish in a town and then down to certain farms in that parish. And that was really interesting. I'm going to show you a map of those locations here. And then when I dug even further, I was able to find an online historical atlas for Denmark. And I'll kind of show a little snippet of that here too, because behind each one of those circles are houses on the map. There was historical information about that farm, who lived there. And there I found these ancestors' names as owners of these farms. So I had a pretty good idea of exactly where they lived. And comparing it to maps today, those places were still on the map today.
Now, you've been talking about your grandmother's paternal side of the family. What did you find out about your grandmother's maternal side of the family?
Well, I found out some really good information too. I used the same process and eventually tied them to 2 villages in Denmark. I did not find quite as much information as I had on the paternal side, but I did link them to these 2 villages by the name of Geerstinge and Bjørnede. Even if the depth and breadth of this information is not as much as on the other side of the family, I could still tie them to villages. And it was personal because I knew this great-grandmother who was part of this family. So now, Bob, I'm really connected to Denmark. I've been reading about these places. I've been thinking about these places. And I go to Bob and I say, Bob, we have to go to Denmark. And he agreed.
Absolutely. I was excited as well, Sarah.
Right, and so we started to make those plans, and now I'm going to go into a little bit of how we did a DIY planning to do this Ancestry trip to Denmark and tell you some of the steps we went through to do that. The first step was to really determine where you're going to go. It's always nice, whether you're an Ancestry traveler or any traveler, say, oh, I want to go to Denmark. Well, that's pretty vague, and you really need to set out some more specific goals about where you want to travel to so you can make those plans. So we had the 2 family history areas to go to, and the Geerstinge and Bjørnede, and we're sorry, we don't speak Danish, so we're probably pronouncing these names terribly, but we're just doing the best we can. Geerstinge and Bjørnede were just west of Copenhagen. And then we had the Vejle area that we needed to go to next, which was in the Jutland, or peninsular part of Denmark. And we couldn't go to Denmark without seeing the sights of Copenhagen as well.
Right.
So we planned 3 areas: Copenhagen, west of Copenhagen, and over to Jutland. So how would we do that was the next question.
Okay, we had to figure out how we would get to these family history areas because they seemed a bit remote. Sarah looked into the possibility of us being able to take a train or a bus service to get to these areas. She found out we weren't able to do that, so we were down to either hiring a driver to take us to these areas or renting a car. We decided we would rent the car, but we did not want to drive it in the Copenhagen area. Driving out in the villages and the more remote areas was something we thought we could handle, and we did. So we did that portion first, and then we drove the car back to Copenhagen, turned it in, and did the rest of our tour of Copenhagen by foot.
Yes, that worked out great. We flew into Copenhagen and we picked up our rental car. We thought it would be best to go to the closest area first because we'd just come off of the overseas flight. So we arranged for a bed and breakfast near Geerstinge. This was kind of cool in and of itself because it was a bed and breakfast on a farm. And it was only about an hour or an hour and a half out of Copenhagen.
You can see by the photo that we were in the peaceful Danish countryside, and this was good because we were learning how to drive by ourselves and get around Denmark. We actually drove the car to a little grocery store, got groceries, then went to our B&B. And at the B&B, we had the luxury of having the farmer provide us a nice Danish breakfast every morning, including fresh eggs from his chickens. It was really good.
It was a really fun and interesting stay. After a good night's rest to recover from jet lag, we headed out on our first adventure to go to the town of Geerstinge and find the church and the cemetery to see if I could find my ancestors there. This was our first experience with Danish or European cemeteries. We naively thought that we could just walk around the cemetery and we would find some headstone with my ancestor's name on it. Well, that is not how it works in most of Europe. Deceased is laid in their burial spot for 10 to 20 years, and unless the family wants to keep paying the lease on that spot, they'll eventually reuse that spot for somebody else. So that was a turn of events I had not expected at all. But even though we could not see actual, cemetery plots for them, it was nice to see the church and see where that family in that time had participated in the life of the community. And that was cool in and of itself.
It really was.
From Geerstinge, we went on to Bjørnede.
Now, this church that you're going to see in the photo that we found was quite remarkable because it was one of the few round churches in Denmark. This church was built around 1170 by an influential member of a local family. The tower of the round church included a room upstairs that the family used as an assembly hall. It was just so amazing to look around in this church and see everything there was to see about it, because this was the church where Sarah's 2 times great-grandmother was baptized. And after looking around downstairs, we climbed the tower and had an amazing view from the top.
Yes, that was a very pretty church to look around and well worth going there.
And it was well maintained and still in excellent condition.
Yes. For lunch and some freelance exploring, we drove down to Sarå. Again, we apologize for any mispronunciations. And toured this historic city. It was founded in the 12th century by a bishop of the Cistercian Abbey, and they built a large church there for the abbey. The church is still there, and you can see that there were many, maybe nobility and famous people buried in the floors of the church.
Having explored everything we could in this first area, we then focused our attention on going to where Sarah's second family area was located. We had a spectacular drive crossing some of the very long bridges in Denmark. The first was the one that took us from the island where Copenhagen is located, to the island of Funen, and then crossing another long, spectacular bridge to get to the peninsula of Jutland. It was quite a drive.
Again, the places we needed to visit were pretty remote. We were able to find a vacation rental apartment in the city of Jelling, Denmark. This was a nice, large apartment connected with a hostel, and it had a full kitchen. We got food from the grocery store and enjoyed eating in, especially since there weren't really that many restaurants in the small town of Jelling.
Jelling is a very old and historical town that played an important role in the history of Denmark. In the Viking Age, it served as the seat of the monarchs of the Kingdom of Denmark, including Gorm the Old, Thyra, and Harald Bluetooth. Jelling is the site of a large Viking ship, which is buried underground, and there are also 2 burial mounds located there as well. There was also a very large stone there that was raised there in honor of King Harald's parents, Gorm and Thyra. The inscription on the large stone also documents King Harald's many accomplishments. King Harald unified Denmark and made Denmark a Christian country. These sites have been UNESCO World Heritage Sites since 1994, and we took our time walking around to see this fabulous area.
Now back to the family search. From my research, I had uncovered 2 farmsteads connected with my family. By doing some further internet research, I located addresses for those farms and the people who were now living in them. And we had made contact with them and arrangements to meet them and look at those 2 farmsteads. My hint in this is don't be afraid to reach out and connect with people.
And it turns out both of the families that we reached out to were very gracious, just absolutely wonderful people, very open to us coming to see Sarah's ancestral homes.
Yes, we first met with the people who now owned a farm called Minstruplund. This farm had been owned by my 4th great-grandfather and his descendants for 3 more generations. We were so glad that they welcomed us and hosted us for the day.
They spoke almost no English, so it turned into a very interesting and exciting day. This lovely couple, their names were Niels and Bodil, and they fixed a fabulous lunch for us. We had the lunch and they offered us each a Danish beer, which was very good to go with the lunch. And the lunch was very special indeed, because the week prior to us arriving, Bodil had gone to Copenhagen and bought herring. She brought it back, she pickled it, and so we had her homemade pickled herring, which was absolutely fabulous.
They showed us the farmstead. Naturally, it had changed a little, but the footprint was pretty much the same, but with modern renovations. And they also drove us around the area. They took us to a neighbor's farm. And again, we don't know what's really happening because of the lack of English, but we're just going along with this process. And these people had also lived in this area for generations, so my ancestors had lived with their ancestors on this farm that we were visiting. And they took us to the backyard and they showed us this stone trough. It was carved out of rock. They explained that the trough had come from another farm owned by my 4 times great-grandfather. His name was Anders Madsen. You can see on the trough the carved initials AM and the date 1859. This was just astounding. Talk about feeling like time travel. History was just reaching out and grabbing you, that there was still some artifact like this with this ancestor's initials on it, and it was still around and being used.
And it was an amazing experience.
Then they showed us this old stone bridge and explained that it also came from that farm that belonged to my 4 times great-grandfather, and they had moved it here. We so appreciated the time that these folks spent with us. They even invited us inside, and we had more Danish beer and some snacks. The funny thing is that when we returned home, this Niels, who had hosted us for the day, wrote me an email in Danish that I had to translate. But basically it said he'd figured out that some distant cousin of his had married some distant cousin of mine, and that somewhere along the road, some ancestor of mine had saved an ancestor of his after a wagon accident by taking him to the hospital and guaranteeing his payment for medical treatment. So, okay, the world just gets smaller and smaller as we go through this process.
Because when we were there, Niels kept saying, I know we are related. I know we are related. We have to be related. And he found that they really were.
He found it out.
The next day, we made arrangements to meet with a lovely young couple that were living currently on the farmstead that was owned by Sarah's 3 times great-grandfather. They showed us around the farmstead and told us what changes and updates had been made through the years. They also had Icelandic horses. They showed the horses to us and described how they rode the horses in competitions. A point of interest here is that the Icelandic horses have a gait that is unique to the Icelandic horse. It's in their DNA. No other horses have that particular gait.
We ate again, didn't we, Bob?
We did. Steen and Maria had a smorgasbord lunch for us waiting inside. So we went inside, we had the lunch, had a Danish beer with it too. And after we finished eating, we had a shot of herbal aquavit. That was very good. But this smorgasbord lunch, it had many different kinds of sandwiches, including one that had caviar and shrimp on it. Another one was called the veterinarian sandwich. It had beef tongue on it. It had foie gras on it. And it was a very rich and hearty sandwich. The meal was absolutely delicious.
As you can see from the photo, these open-faced sandwiches were just gorgeous. They took us around. They made the effort to take us around to some of the older village residents to see if they would know anything more about my family. And then they also took us to the parish church. We walked around the cemetery, and because of the cemetery thing, I couldn't find any direct ancestors still buried there. Because of all the research I had done, I did recognize names of cousins and from the area. It was just such an emotional experience to actually see these places where my ancestors went to church, lived, and worked.
It was emotional for me too, Sarah. And they weren't even my ancestors.
We were just really lucky to be able to find those actual farmsteads, and they still existed. Lots of times when you do this type of work, you're just lucky if you can find the village that they were from and visit the village. So it was a rare experience to be able to visit the actual farms where my ancestors had lived.
We next drove back to Copenhagen and spent 3 days exploring the city. We were able to get a hotel on the Nyhavn, which is the famous canal area with the beautiful buildings that you see in all the tourist photos. And we enjoyed walking along the Nyhavn every time that we left our hotel and went out for a walking journey. We were able, by walking, to take in some of the most famous sites in the city of Copenhagen. We did our research prior to going to Copenhagen, and we made our list of essential places that we must see. One of the first things we did was to take a canal tour by boat. This helped to orient us to the city, and it gave us an idea of other places that we could walk to and see in Copenhagen.
We always recommend this if you go to a new city, is to get on some sort of city tour to orientate you, and you'll probably have a list of things that you want to see in the city, but going on the tour might give you an idea of some other things that would be good to see. And whether that's a hop on hop-off bus or a canal tour like we took in Denmark. They are great things to do in planning your DIY travel.
We will now show you a short montage of the sights that we were able to see in Copenhagen.
So I hope you have enjoyed reliving this journey with me. It was a trip to always remember. If you have been inspired to find out where your ancestors came from, don't be afraid to do it. I hope I've given you a few hints for getting started on this process. There's a vast amount of information out there in paid services like Ancestry.com, but don't forget to look for the free things as well. And you can even hire people to do the research for you and to plan your trip. We had fun doing our own research and planning our own trip, but that might not be something you feel like you can do. We have done a couple other Ancestry trips and they have all been very rewarding. They're not the sole reason for our trip lots of time, but they are a part of a bigger trip to see other things. If you have made an ancestor trip like this before, and I think a lot of people have, let me know in the comments. And you're welcome to share what experiences you'd like to share in those comments.
As we've said before, we are part-time retirees doing part-time travel to see as much of the world as we can. We'll plan on doing additional cruises, road trips, locally in the United States and internationally. And we'll share those exciting adventures with you.
To help sort through all of these different travel activities, we are sorting them into playlists. And with this video today, I'm going to make a new playlist for Ancestry travel. Let us know if you'd like to have more of this kind of travel experience shown in our videos. Thanks for joining us today, and we appreciate your participation in our channel. If you have enjoyed this video, give us a like and subscribe, and we will continue to grow our channel and bring you more information about traveling. Until next time, we say
Bye.
goodbye.